give up. As the United Nations Secretary General said, we cannot give up. We cannot surrender our hopes or our ideals. We must draw closer, not drift apart. Together we must strive to achieve our hopes, our dreams. The United Nations was born from the ashes of the Second World War that claimed scores of millions of lives. It was created to secure peace, security, justice, and freedom for all. We remain committed to internationalism, to multilateralism, and to every effort that strengthens this great institution. Today, Indonesia is nearer than ever before to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals of ending extreme poverty and hunger. Because years ago, this very chamber chose to listen and uphold social and economic justice. We will never forget. And today, we must never be silent while Palestinians are denied that same justice and legitimacy in this very hall. Excellencies, Thucydides warned, the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. We must reject this doctrine. The United Nations exists to reject this doctrine. We must stand for all, the strong and the weak. Might cannot be right. Right must be right. Indonesia today is one of the largest contributors to United Peacekeeping Forces. We believe in the United Nations. We will continue to serve where peace needs guardians, not with just words, but with boots on the ground. If and when the United Nations Security Council and this great assembly decide Indonesia is prepared to deploy 20,000 or even more of our sons and daughters to help secure peace in Gaza or elsewhere, in Ukraine, in Sudan, in Libya, everywhere when the peace needs to be enforced, peace needs to be guarded, we are ready. We will take our share of the burden, not only with our sons and daughters, we are also willing to contribute financially to support the great mission to achieve peace by the United Nations. Madam President, Excellencies, I propose to this Assembly a message of hope and optimism, grounded in action and execution. Today, we heard the speech of Madam President, the President of the United Nations General Assembly. Yes, it is true what she said. Without the International Civil Aviation Organization, will we be here today? Will we sit in this great hall? Without the United Nations, we cannot be safe. No country can feel secure. We need the United Nations, and Indonesia will continue to support the United Nations. Even though we still struggle, but we know the world needs a strong United Nations. The world's population is growing. Our planet is under strain. Food, energy, and water insecurity haunt many nations. We choose to answer these challenges directly at home and to help abroad wherever we can. This year, Indonesia recorded the highest rice production and grain reserves in our history. We are now self-sufficient in rice, and we are starting now to export rice to other nations in need, including providing rice for Palestine. We are building resilient food supply chains, strengthening farmer productivity, investing in climate-smart agriculture to ensure food security for our children and for the children of the world. We are confident in a few years' time, Indonesia will be the granary of the world. As the world's largest island state, we testify before you that we are already experiencing the direct consequences of climate change, particularly the threat of rising sea levels. The sea level on the north coast of our capital city is increasing by 5 centimeters every year. Can you imagine in 10 years? Can you imagine in 20 years? For this, we are forced to build a giant seawall, 480 kilometers in length. It will take us maybe 20 years, but we have no choice. We have to start now. Therefore, we choose to confront climate change not by slogans, but by immediate steps. We are committed to meeting our 2015 Paris Agreement obligations. We aim to achieve net zero emission by 2060, and we are very confident we can achieve net zero emission much earlier. We aim to reforest more than 12 million hectares of degraded forest, to reduce forest degradation, to empower local communities with quality green jobs for the future. Indonesia is shifting decisively from fossil fuel-based development towards renewable-based development. From next year, most of our additional power generation capacity will come from renewables. Our goal is clear: to lift all of our citizens out of poverty and make Indonesia a hub for solutions to food, energy, and water security. Madam President, Excellencies, we live in a time when hatred and violence can seem to be the loudest voices. But beneath this loud noise lies a quieter truth, that every person longs to be safe, to be respected, to be loved, and to leave a better world to their children. Our children are watching. They are learning leadership not from textbook, but from our choices. Today, still, a catastrophic situation in Gaza is unfolding before our eyes. At this very moment, the innocent are crying for help, are crying to be saved. Who will save them? Who will save the innocent? Who will save the old and women? Millions are facing danger at this very moment. As we sit here, they are facing trauma. They are facing irreparable damage to their bodies. They are dying of starvation. Can we remain silent? Will there be no answer to their screams? Will we teach them that the human family can rise to the challenge? Madam President, we must act now. Many speakers said that. We must stand for a multilateral order where peace, prosperity, and progress are not the privilege of a few, but the right of all. With a strong United Nations, we can build a world where the weak do not suffer what they must, but live the justice that they deserve. Let us continue humanity's great journey of ideals, the selfless aspirations that created the United Nations. Let us use science to uplift, not use science to destroy. Let rising nations help others to lift themselves. I am convinced that the leaders of the great world civilizations of the West, of the East, of the North, of the South, leaders of America, Europe, of India, China, the Islamic world, the whole world, I am convinced they will rise to their role demanded by history. We are all hopeful that the leaders of the world will show great statesmanship, great wisdom, restraint, humility, overcome hate, overcome suspicion. Madam President, distinguished delegates, we are greatly heartened by the events of the last few days, where significant leading countries of the world have chosen to side with history, to choose the right side of history, the path of the moral high ground, the path of rectitude, the path of justice, the path of humanity, to shun hatred, to overcome suspicion, and to avoid the use of violence. The use of violence will beget violence. No one country can bully the whole community of the human family. We may be weak individually, but the sense of oppression, the sense of injustice has proven in the history of mankind that this sense of injustice, this sense of oppression will unite into a strong force that will overcome this oppression, that will overcome this injustice. To close, I would like to reiterate again Indonesia's complete support for the two-state solution in Palestine. We must have an independent Palestine, but we must also recognize, we must also respect, and we must also guarantee the safety and security of Israel. Only then we can have real peace, and no longer hate and no longer suspicion. The only solution is this two-state solution. Two descendants of Abraham must live in reconciliation, peace, and harmony.
Hey, good morning, Pillow.
Arabs, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, all religions, we must live as one human family. Indonesia is committed to being part of making this vision a reality.
That's easy for you to say, Indonesia. I'll be right back. We'll get started here in just a sec.
Hey Hitler, you probably didn't even hate the Jews. That was just a myth making you crazy.
You get back in the closet. You deserve a fucking ass whooping. All of you, get back in the closet. Go fuck yourself.
How much does it cost for fascism? How much do the taxpayers have to pay for a fascist country?
They're evil. They are actively doing evil. So treat them like the evil that they are.
The right to exist argument has been used now to the point where what it's going to mean is that the Israel you're talking about will include the annexed and illegally occupied West Bank. It's very interesting, the Israeli government has never said where it thinks the borders of Israel really ought to be and what it would settle for. I think it would be an immense help if it tells us where it thinks Israel's boundaries should be. Every other country does do that.
It's time to stop pretending otherwise. It's time to be ruthless, and time to afford them the same amount of grace that they give to their Palestinian victims, because they are only going to get more and more ruthless with their victims if you don't.
I'm Amy Goodman. Israeli strikes on the Gaza Strip killed at least 38 Palestinians and injured another 190 over the past 24 hours. An estimated 500,000 Palestinians remain in Gaza City, despite an advance by Israeli tanks, paratroopers, explosive-laden robots, and remote-controlled vehicles. Among the latest victims is a...
And you can see in videos, like in the daytime and the nighttime. In the nighttime, you'll see these glows of explosions on the horizon from these remote detonations. And in the daytime, you just get mushroom clouds in the distance. And on top of that, they are hitting people who have been displaced, carrying all of their belongings with them. They're getting hit with airstrikes. There's one that I saw from the Gaza Notifications X account where they were trying to get a bunch of people who were in the street who had been martyred and injured, and one guy was missing half of his head. They are not slowing down the genocide. They are simply shuffling people around so as to murder them and genocide them more efficiently.
A 5-year-old Palestinian girl named Noor, whose parents frantically searched the rubble of their Gaza City home Monday after it was flattened by an Israeli strike.
This was all over Twitter.
Bring me Noor, bring me Noor. In 7 years, I've only had her. I do not have any children except her. Noor is under the rubble. Where is Noor?
Noor was found under the debris, but later died in an ambulance. Her family had fled their home in the Zaytun neighborhood after it was destroyed in a previous strike. Meanwhile, Gaza's health ministry is warning patients face certain death at hospitals that have nearly exhausted fuel supplies needed for generators that power life-saving medical equipment. France has formally recognized a Palestinian state for the first time. President Emmanuel Macron declared France's recognition Monday as the United Nations convened its General Assembly for the 80th consecutive year.
Le temps est venu.
The time has come.
C'est pourquoi.
This is why.
Fidèle à l'engagement historique.
Loyalty to my country's historic commitment to the Middle East.
Pour la paix entre le
for peace among Israeli people
et le peuple palestinien.
And the Palestinian people.
Je déclare que la France
I declare that France recognizes today the state of Palestine.
Andorra, Belgium, Luxembourg, Malta, and Monaco also declared their recognition of a Palestinian state Monday. With France's recognition, the United States is now the only member of the UN Security Council not to recognize Palestine.
Wow.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu slammed the declarations as a, quote, huge reward to terrorism, unquote, and said a Palestinian state, quote, will not happen. In Italy, tens of thousands of people took to the streets of dozens of cities Monday as Italian labor unions led a nationwide 24-hour general strike to demand an end to Israel's assault on Gaza. In Rome, tens of thousands joined a march that blocked a major highway.
Across like 70 plus cities. It was crazy.
There were similar scenes in Bologna, where student protesters occupied university lecture halls. In Venice, police fired water cannons to disperse protesters, while dock workers led marches in Genoa and other port cities seeking to block weapons exports to Israel. This is Genoa resident Dario Rossi.
If you know any Italian YouTubers or anybody on social media, check in on them.
Genoa is a port and therefore the ideal place to try and stop this trade in arms that are fueling genocide. These weapons should not be allowed to pass because our laws prohibit trading arms with countries that are at war and violate human rights, yet they pass through unhindered. Fortunately, we have a very combative group of dock workers here who are fighting tooth and nail and dragging the entire citizenry into this protest, which is spreading nationally and internationally.
The U.S. Supreme Court is allowing President Trump to fire the Federal Trade Commission's last remaining Democrat, Rebecca Kelly Slaughter, and is set to hear oral arguments in December on whether federal law grants presidents the power to fire officials of independent agencies. In her dissent, Justice Elena Kagan wrote, quote, President Trump may now remove, so says the majority, though Congress said differently, any member he wishes for any reason or no reason at all. And he may thereby extinguish the agency's bipartisanship and independence, Kagan wrote. ABC has announced Jimmy Kimmel's show will return to the airwaves tonight after it was indefinitely suspended following FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr's threats to revoke the broadcast licenses of affiliates over comments Kimmel made about Charlie Kirk's assassin. In a statement, the Walt Disney Company, which owns ABC, said, quote, last Wednesday, we made the decision to suspend production on the show to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment for our country. It's a decision we made because we felt some of the comments were ill-timed and thus insensitive. We've spent the last days having thoughtful conversations with...
Oh, you felt it, all right.
Jimmy, and after those conversations, we reached the decision to return the show on Tuesday, unquote. This statement comes as a movement to boycott Disney Plus, Hulu, and other Disney-owned subscription services was gathering steam in the wake of Kimmel's suspension. Meanwhile, Sinclair Broadcast Group, which owns dozens of ABC affiliates, said it will not air Jimmy Kimmel Live on its stations and will replace it with news programming. On Monday, unions led a rally for free speech outside Jimmy Kimmel's studio in Hollywood. Joining the protest was California Democratic Congressmember Laura Friedman.
Is the Trump administration deciding what you can watch on television, what jokes he thinks you should be able to hear? He does not want dissent, and he's not above using the highest powers of the law to clamp down on dissent. That's un-American, it's dangerous, and it's something that we need to raise the alarm about.
President Trump's proposing sweeping changes to how children are vaccinated, saying the MMR vaccine should be broken up into separate shots. At a White House press conference flanked by Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Centers for Medicare and Medicaid head Dr. Mehmet Oz, Trump said children should instead receive separate shots for measles, mumps, and rubella, though he apparently forgot the name rubella. Trump also recommended removing aluminum from vaccines and said parents should wait until their children are 12 to vaccinate against hepatitis B, falsely stating the viral infection is only sexually transmitted, even though it can also be spread through open wounds, contaminated objects during birth, or through breastfeeding. Trump said his recommendations were, quote, based on what I feel, unquote. He made the remarks while promoting unproven claims that vaccines and the common painkiller, acetaminophen, cause autism, despite decades of research showing no proven links.
Effective immediately, the FDA will be notifying physicians that the use of well, let's see how we say that. Acetaminophen.
No way. Did you see that, Pillow? Oh my god, man. Look at my president, dog.
Immediately, the FDA will be notifying physicians that the use of well, let's see how we say that. Acetaminophen. Is that okay? Which is basically commonly known as Tylenol.
Yes, Mr. President, you said
during
it
pregnancy
right,
can be associated with a very increased risk of autism. So taking Tylenol
sound it out, Mr. President,
is not good.
The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists called the announcement irresponsible, adding, quote, it's highly unsettling that our federal health agencies are willing to make an announcement that'll affect the health and well-being of millions of people without the backing of reliable data, unquote. In immigration news, hundreds of people who were once detained at the troubled immigration jail in the Florida Everglades, dubbed Alligator Alcatraz, have disappeared. The Miami Herald reports about two-thirds of the 1,800 immigrants who were held there in July have gone missing from ICE's online database, with their families unable to locate them. Earlier this month, the federal appeals court ruled the jail could continue to operate despite reports of abuse. The Trump administration is trying to limit the enforcement of the Fair Housing Act. That's according to the New York Times review of dozens of emails, memos, and other internal communications, as well as interviews with current and former workers at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. Speaking to the Times, lawyers say they've been blocked from communicating with clients without approval from a Trump appointee. Staff members also detail how their fair housing work is being dismissed as an offshoot of DEI. In response, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren said her office is reviewing documents shared by whistleblowers inside HUD.
Documents detail how the Trump administration apparently views the office that enforces civil rights protections in housing as a, quote, optics problem. Imagine thinking that defending black families from being denied a mortgage because they're black, or protecting a mom and her kids from living with an abusive father is a, quote, optics problem. Imagine thinking that it's an optics problem to help the dad with a bad knee whose landlord refuses to install a handrail on the stairs.
Prominent Egyptian blogger Alaa Abdel Fattah has been released from prison along with several other prisoners following the announcement of presidential pardons Monday in Egypt. Alaa spent most of the last 12 years in and out of prison due to his political activism. Alaa Abdel Fattah reunited with his mother, Leila Swaif, who'd been on a hunger strike for months demanding her son's freedom. Also celebrating Alaa's release Monday at their home in Cairo with his sister, Sana Saif.
We wish for this moment to come for all the families of political detainees. I'm praying that this is the end of tragedies in our family and that Alaa is allowed to travel and to be with his son.
We'll have more on Alaa's pardon and release later in the broadcast. In related news, a human rights investigations uncovered a mass grave in Egypt's North Sinai, which researchers believe was used by the Egyptian military to bury the bodies of victims of extrajudicial killings. The Colombian government's terminated arms purchases from the United States, its largest military partner, as tensions rise with the Trump administration over accusations Colombia is failing to combat cocaine trafficking. Colombian President Gustavo Petro denounced the U.S. intervention, saying his government, quote, will not be blackmailed, and that more cocaine has been seized under his administration than any previous presidents. In more news from Colombia, 12 former soldiers have been sentenced to 8 years of reparations work over their role in the extrajudicial executions of 135 civilians during Colombia's U.S.-backed conflict. The killings were part of what became known as the false positive scandal, when U.S.-backed Colombian soldiers massacred thousands of civilians, falsely counting them as rebel fighters. The White House said Monday it had dismissed an offer by Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to engage in direct talks with President Trump aimed at de-escalating a U.S. naval buildup near Venezuela's coast. The brush-off came after Trump declared he'd ordered the bombing of another vessel he alleged was trafficking drugs to the United States. Trump shared video on his social media site Truth Social of an apparent airstrike on a speedboat, writing in all caps, quote, "Stop selling fentanyl, narcotics, and illegal drugs in America and committing violence and terrorism against Americans," unquote. Trump did not specify where the bombing occurred, the name of the alleged terrorist organization involved, or who conducted the attack. The strikes appear to have occurred outside any declared war zone, targeting civilians who pose no immediate threat. Legal experts say such extrajudicial killings violate both U.S. and international law and constitute war crimes. And the International Criminal Courts charged former Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte with 3 counts of crimes against humanity. Duterte is accused of orchestrating the extrajudicial killings of dozens of people between 2013 and 18 as part of his devastating so-called war on drugs. The UN estimates over 8,600 people were killed during Duterte's rule, with some estimates suggesting the true toll could be 3 times higher. Last year, Duterte admitted under oath he oversaw a death squad of gangsters while he served as mayor of the southern city of Davao. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York. Juan Gonzalez is in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Welcome, everyone, to the Dropside News Tuesday morning live stream. I'm your host this week, Murtaza Hossein. We have a lot to get through this week. There are a couple of major developments I want to touch on before we get to our main topic. First of all, over the past couple of days, there's been a tremendous development, which has been the breakdown of talks between Iran and the E3 countries, which are the European countries, Germany, France, and the UK, over the subject of its nuclear program. Obviously, in June, there was a major war between Iran, Israel, and also the United States over Iran's nuclear program, during which the European countries also participated in providing intelligence and political and logistical support for the war. So now there have been some talks aimed at averting what are called the UN snapback sanctions. And without going into great detail, the snapback sanctions, the snapback was a mechanism to reimpose the 2015 sanctions that were lifted on Iran by the United Nations when it signed the nuclear deal under President Obama. There was a period during which these snapback sanctions may have been averted, about a 30-day period of negotiations. We're reaching the final days of that period, and the signs are not good at the moment. So what that means is if the sanctions are reimposed and no new deal to govern Iran's nuclear program, its relations with France and the other European countries comes to pass in the next, by the end of this month, basically, you will see, first of all, the reimposition of these very harsh sanctions on Iran.
Oh, shit. Give me my cord. Okay. So in case you missed it, this is what happened. This is basically all that Trump said in his speech. It was a lot of horse shit, mostly. U.S. President Donald Trump lambasted the United Nations and countries around the world during a nearly hour-long speech today at the UN General Assembly. What he said, Trump admonished the UN over what he views as its ineffectiveness. He said some countries are going to hell over their immigration policies, and he blasted climate change measures and what he called the green energy scam. Meanwhile, as a number of countries have recognized a Palestinian state, Trump framed it as a reward for Hamas as he reaffirmed calls for a ceasefire and end to the Gaza conflict. On Ukraine, the U.S. leader criticized European countries for not ending their purchases of Russian oil. Trump calls climate change the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world. Trump says tariffs are a mechanism to ensure the U.S. sovereignty and security. Just doesn't understand. Tariffs, Trump calls Christianity the most persecuted religion on the planet today. I'm sure Israel wasn't too happy to hear that. We had excellent chemistry. That was also pretty funny. He was like getting a little zesty with Lula. Trump goes off script and over time with various digressions. President Trump's his speech, which began without a teleprompter, turned mostly off script. He went into tangents about his crime reduction efforts in U.S. cities, Barack Obama's carbon footprint, and his own stymied efforts to renovate the UN's headquarters, and the efficacy of windmills. We don't want cows anymore. I guess they want to kill all the cows, he said at one point without explanation. If there is a through line, it is his criticism of how most of the world and the UN itself is handling matters, and an accounting of how his approach is better. Even for Trump, the digressions have been striking. In Asia, they dump much of their garbage right into the ocean, he intoned at one point. His audience of global delegates didn't offer any audible reaction beyond laughing at his description of meeting Brazilian President Luis Lula da Silva backstage. He went well beyond the 15-minute limit for leaders' speeches, though many of his counterparts also extend past their slotted time. Oh my God. Trump falsely claims renewable energy is more expensive than fossil fuel. Ow, my fingers. This is a heavy microphone. Trump highlights counter-cartel mission warning, we will blow you out of existence. Great. Yeah, that was weird when he said that. We will obliterate you out of existence tremendously. Trump accuses UN of funding uncontrolled migration and creating problems for Western nations. President Donald Trump accused the United Nations of funding the migration crisis during his address in the UN. It was one of the first things he talked about. Trump warns countries they're going to hell because of these policies. Trump announces international effort to enforce biological weapons convention through AI verification system. What is the purpose of the United Nations? Trump says he ended multiple wars without the UN's help. Today repeated his claim of ending 7 wars and said that he never received help from the United Nations, questioning the purpose of the intergovernmental organization. He listed conflicts between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Cambodia and Thailand, Israel and Iran, India and Pakistan, Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Egypt and Ethiopia, Serbia and Kosovo. According to an analysis from CNN's Stephen Collinson, some of these, quote, deals are closer to ceasefires than peace agreements that permanently end generational disputes. The president's team is scanning the globe, looking for fires to extinguish to claim quick wins for his transparent campaign for a Nobel Peace Prize, Collinson writes. Just a short while ago, Trump touched on his desire to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in his speech, too, claiming that, quote, everyone thinks that he deserves one. The president claimed the UN didn't try to help in his efforts. I ended 7 wars, dealt with leaders to each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help finalize the deal, he said. I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle, and then a teleprompter that didn't work, he lamented. That being the case, what is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential, he asked, but not even coming close to living up to that potential for the most part, at least for now. All they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow up that letter. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war. Trump dresses down European nations for purchasing Russian energy, blah, blah, blah. Trump says momentum for recognition of a Palestinian state is a reward for Hamas. So yeah, pretty gross overall. There's a picture of him looking worried on the escalator. Oh, God. Tiffany Trump and husband Michael Boulos among those at UN. This interference in domestic affairs is aided by the subservient far right who is nostalgic of past hegemonies. More of a dire warning, more tactfully said, and just more information in one sentence than Trump did in his entire hour on stage.
But also, it would extremely, greatly increase the odds of a new war between Iran, Israel, the United States, perhaps other countries as well too, because the snapback sanctions would give great diplomatic cover and political legitimation to people who would like to engage in that war, anyways. So unfortunately, it looks like we're trending towards another conflict, and we see preparations inside Iran and other countries as well too for what a new conflict may look like. And this conflict, if it does come to pass, is likely to be far more bloody and brutal than the war in June was. As bad as that was, this could be a far more extreme conflict between Israel and Iran, and also maybe the U.S. and other countries in the region as well too. So it's something we're watching, and we're going to be talking about more in the weeks and months to come. Another issue, which is somewhat tangentially related to our main topic, but I do think is worth bringing up, has been really interesting and alarming recent developments in Eastern Europe. Over the last week and a half to 2 weeks, there have been numerous incursions by drones and military aircraft believed to have come from Russia in NATO countries. And we've seen first in Poland, there was a very widespread and massive drone incursion a week ago. It happened again in Romania. There were aircraft which violated Estonian airspace allegedly as well too. And then yesterday, maybe arguably the most serious incursion to date, in Denmark and in Norway, over major airports, there were large drones spotted hovering over the airports for a period of several hours. They caused the shutdown of the airports, major international airports, flight disruptions, which are probably going to last until tomorrow at least. And the drones then escaped without any, interception or shooting down and so forth. But the governments of the countries have all pointed the finger at Russia. And several countries have activated the Article 4 stipulation in NATO, which calls upon other countries to defend the border and airspace of countries which believe that their border and airspace is threatened. That's one.
Oh yeah, President Lula of Brazil also said, you know what else is buried under the rubble in Gaza? American exceptionalism. Oh God, dude. Part of why I think the audience, there was such a pop in the audience when Trump was talking about how he had such a nice interaction with Lula, is that, bro, that dude just dressed down your whole country. You weren't listening? God damn.
One step below Article 5, which basically means triggering a mutual defense compact within NATO. So we're really, really close to a situation, and we may not get there, but we're definitely edging closer every day to a situation where Poland or another NATO country triggers Article 5 and asks the rest of the alliance to defend them or to engage in an armed conflict with Russia. Obviously, this all stemmed originally from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, as that situation has gone on, it's gotten more and more dangerous, not less dangerous in that time. And we're seeing now an escalation of this conflict right now. So, it's a moment where we're seeing the international order somewhat break down. And this week, which is kind of what we want to talk about more, it's the week of the UN General Assembly. And this is when the United Nations, all the countries of the UN, converge on New York City. They come for the assembly itself, they come for meetings, events, and so forth, to kind of discuss and get a state of play of where the world's heading at the moment. And so much is going on with that, but one aspect we want to discuss today, particularly, is the issue of the state of Palestine and the recognition of the state of Palestine by, a large number of countries which had previously been obstinate and had tried to hold out for some other agreement. More clearly, there have been, most of the world recognized the Palestinian state for many, many years now, but European countries and, Five Eyes countries, Anglophone countries, have been holdouts with the US on that subject. But we've seen this week Canada, the UK, France, Portugal, Australia, several other smaller countries recognizing a Palestinian state, and the dam is kind of breaking on that subject. At this point, it's really, mainly just the US now, which is a significant holdout, and some other countries which are very dependent on the US, like Japan, which may still recognize the Palestinian state in the near future. There's hints at that as well, too. But, we see a situation where pretty much a supermajority of the world now acknowledges and recognizes the Palestinian state, and there are efforts to instantiate one now in the Gaza Strip and elsewhere, even in a condition where obviously there's genocide taking place, an armed conflict. Israeli government which has vowed to never allow such a state to come to pass. So with the announcement by the UK and other countries that they are recognizing the state, there's been a lot of confusion and debate about what this means. Is this just a symbolic declaration? Are there meaningful consequences to this recognition and so forth? We want to get into that a bit more and talk a bit more deeply about the broader implications and what they are, if any, of this major diplomatic turning point, at least. So we have a great guest coming on today, and we're bringing him on now, H.A. Elliott. H.A. is a long-time Middle East analyst, expert, an old friend of mine, someone who I really rely on for analysis of the subject. And we've been talking quite a bit about what's been going on with the UN in this past week. H.A., thank you so much for joining us. And I want to ask you, to start off, what's your reaction, actually? Because, we've seen quite a bit of discussion of the subject, and obviously the UK and other countries have very major G7 countries for the first time have joined this recognition. What do you think it means, and how are you interpreting these events in the last few days?
So, Maz, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be on the program with you. Deeply appreciate the work that you and Dropsite do, so thank you. It's quite an honor. There's a few things that I'd like to mention. First, actually, the number of countries that recognize a Palestinian state, the number was well over a supermajority quite a long time ago, actually. The most recent wave of recognitions have been around 10 countries over the last couple of years. But if you go before that, you still had around 140 countries out of 193 countries that are member states of the UN that recognize the state of Palestine. The state of Palestine was announced, I think, in 1988 by the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and immediately recognized by most of the Global South. And then you saw more countries recognized thereafter. And then, of course, there was another wave of recognitions later on, particularly from Latin America, South America. So you're really in the last sort of phase with regards to recognition. You're correct. The United States is really isolated on this particular point. There are very few other countries that are really holding out. Japan is a significant exception, but I do think that they will change that position in due course. Not that it makes a terrible amount of difference, but with all due respect to Japan, they don't really engage on this issue very much. Singapore, a lot of Southeast Asian countries, they're pretty much there or done already. The question, and this is why I won't say skeptical. Skeptical is perhaps the wrong word. But since the announcement by Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister in the UK, that the UK would recognize a Palestinian state subject to certain conditions, that if the Israelis fulfilled those conditions, then he wouldn't, which I thought was a really bad fudge. But be that as it may, he was going to recognize. I found the announcement, frankly, to be a bit of a trap. And I want to explain what I mean by that, because I'm very pleased that recognition has taken place, because on a symbolic level, it puts the Palestinian people into a certain category, at least within Europe. Of course, they were in this category elsewhere in the world for many, many years, but they are recognized as a people, and a people deserving self-determination. And any people that warrant self-determination should have their state recognized. So to me, it was not about punishing the
We
Israelis.
began with French
it was
President
not about
Emmanuel
rewarding
Macron
anybody in Palestine either, irrespective of what political group you might be speaking of. It was simply a recognition that we acknowledge that the Palestinian people are a people and they warrant self-determination. The trap, I think, and haven't moved on from this, the trap is that recognition would take place, but no policy steps thereafter that would really put pressure on the Israelis to stop the occupation of that state would follow. And that's a trap. And I say trap very clearly because I think a previous trap was frankly the peace process. When the Oslo Accords were signed, I think they were built off of a lot of goodwill and good faith, but a major flaw, which the Norwegians themselves recognize. In fact, I think the Norwegian foreign minister pretty much stated as such at the UN a couple months ago. The major flaw was that there was no accountability mechanism within the Oslo Accords to hold to account people or individuals or entities or states that violated international law. So you had many countries, quote unquote, sign up to the Oslo Peace Accords, recognize them, talk about the peace process. The number of times I heard diplomats and statesmen talk about the peace process in the early 2000s and 2010s, but without any follow-ups. So that, oh, we support the peace process. It's like, well, what does that mean? If you support the peace process, what are you going to do about those that are sabotaging the peace process? And if you're not doing anything at all, then this just becomes a rhetorical tool so that you can show politically that you're doing something. But actually on the ground, very little is changing. And on the contrary, it became a cover. So you had more settlements built in the occupied West Bank during the period of the peace process than you did before. Okay, for example, right? And of course, that's just talking about the structural elements of statehood that we're considering right now. It doesn't bring into the equation the genocidal war that is taking place on Gaza. What does this have to say about that? And I think that these things have to be kept in the picture. I wrote a piece in the Financial Times early in the summer, which I think still holds, that goes into this. It's all about the fact that, yes, recognize the state of Palestine, but make sure that there's something to be recognized, that we're not simply going to be recognizing a graveyard. That's not my phrase, by the way. The recognition of a graveyard phrase actually comes from the former Israeli ambassador to Paris.
Recognition
who wrote
of a
an open letter
graveyard.
to President Macron saying that if you don't exact consequences and a price on the Israelis, then what you may end up recognizing is simply a graveyard. And I think it's a very important warning.
Yeah, it's a very poignant way of putting it. So one thing I was curious in your take, and I haven't seen the specifics of this recognition, is one question is what the territorial boundaries are they recognizing exactly? Because obviously
says she's warned Israel not to annex parts of the West Bank in retaliation for the UK's formal recognition of Palestinian statehood. She said that the government was committed to a two-state solution in the region. Ms. Cooper was speaking to the BBC before attending the UN General Assembly in New York, where France and other European states are due to make a similar announcement. Well, this follows Sunday's coordinated announcements by the UK, Canada, Australia and Portugal. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has accused those who recognise Palestine of rewarding terrorists. He insisted Palestinian statehood would not happen. And the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas welcomed the move as a step towards lasting regional peace. Hamas called it a victory. Here's our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale.
The West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza may be occupied Palestinian territories, but do they form a state? Yesterday, Britain, Canada and Australia said they did. And at the United Nations today, France and several other European nations will follow suit and make similar declarations.
This is very much a joint effort. Western countries coming together to try to maximise the impact, to send a signal to Israel and its allies that they believe international opinion on this is only heading in one direction.
The Foreign Secretary told us the UK had taken a moral decision to challenge the idea there could never be a Palestinian state.
That is doing what extremists on all sides want, which is abandoning any prospect of a two-state solution, that it is incumbent on us now to revive the whole vision, the purpose of a two-state solution.
How concerned are you about the risk of Israel using this as a pretext to start annexing parts of the West Bank?
We have been clear, and I have been clear to the Israeli Foreign Minister, we have been clear to the Israeli government that they must not do that.
The idea that Gaza, devastated by war, and the West Bank, filled with Israeli settlements, could form a single state might seem a distant prospect. And Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, said it would never happen, saying a Palestinian state would be a terror state. But the man leading the UN's aid agency in Gaza told us a Palestinian state was possible, only if there was a ceasefire.
The declaration is not enough. The declaration are words for the time being. Now we have to walk the talk. So this declaration needs now to be accompanied by this genuine commitment to make the resolve of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict a top priority.
Western powers want to give Palestinians what they call a horizon of hope, but they need a ceasefire first. James Landau, BBC News, New York.
Obviously, the traditional formulation from Oslo in 1967 is that
Without presenting it.
Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem and so forth. But I'm not totally clear what all these countries have the same view of what the boundaries of the Palestinian state that they're recognizing are. And one thing that I'm curious of is that it seems very likely, and we don't know for sure yet, but there's very strong indications from the Israeli side that they are planning to take measures practically on the ground to render ineffective or moot, in their view, any recognition. So they've been hinting very strongly maybe annexation of parts of what has traditionally legally been considered, at least since 1967, the borders of a putative Palestinian state. They may annex part of Gaza, they may annex part of West Bank, they may annex the entire West Bank. These are all things which have been talked about as possible scenarios. So the thing that's interesting to me is that even if one were to take the most conservative view of what a territory legally of a Palestinian state is, it's likely that the Israelis are currently encroaching on it or are about to encroach on it in a manner which is, quite extreme, like you're actually occupying another country, a legally recognized country, annexing its territory. There are very few countries in the world which engage in behavior like that. Russia is like one country just trying to do it, but it's a very unique and extreme circumstance anywhere in the world. If the Israelis, tomorrow or next week announce, well, we're going to respond by annexing 30% of the West Bank or something like that, what would the legal sort of shift be? Because it seems to me that would justify, even if international law, is not difficult to actualize due to various coordination problems and so forth, at least domestically in the courts of all these countries that recognize the Palestinian state, it would open the door to legal measures and potentially sanctions, de-recognition of Israeli passports. It'd be very difficult to do business with Israel legally in these countries. What do you see as possible consequences? And is there a way of instantiating that, at least at a domestic level, if it can be done at the UN level?
So those are some very good questions. If I can just summarize them into three. One, what are the borders? Two, what are the consequences of occupation and annexation if they decide to annex? And three, I suppose I'm not doing this in order. Three is what are the Israelis going to do with regards to recognition? So first of all, when it comes to the borders, it may be different in different countries, okay? But certainly when it comes to the UK, East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and Gaza are all recognized as occupied territory. And apart from the Golan Heights, I mentioned these particular four because they relate to the War of 1967, where Israel invaded and occupied these territories. When it comes, of course, to the Golan Heights, that's Syrian territory. For the other three, the position of the UK government for many years has been that these are the occupied Palestinian territories. So when we want to see what sort of borders are being considered here, I think the borders are pretty clear in the sense that the occupied Palestinian territories become the recognized borders of a state of Palestine. Now, I suspect what you'll get if you press government officials in the UK on this point, they'll say that final status of borders are to be determined between the parties, okay? Because indeed that was something that was mentioned earlier on in I think it was like about 20 years ago in terms of swaps of territory. So that could very easily be one of the formulations. I don't think they've made that particularly clear. But if people want to go by law, which I think that they should, the International Court of Justice last year made it abundantly clear that these territories are occupied, that the occupation of these territories is illegal, that Israel must end the occupation of these territories immediately, and states internationally should take all steps that are necessary in order to end that occupation. So it's not as nebulous as I think people sometimes try to posit. They say, oh, well, what are you recognizing? We don't know what we're recognizing. It's like, actually, you do. The problem, and by the way, when it comes to recognition, the state of Israel adamantly refuses to identify its own borders. This never caused any country to say we don't recognize the state of Israel, despite the fact that there are international borders of the state of Israel, but the state of Israel itself refuses to identify its borders. It refuses to identify its borders. So I think that that's important. When it comes to consequences, actually, no, let's go to the reactions first. There's been a lot of talk about how recognition of the state of Palestine upset negotiations that were ongoing between Israel and Hamas, that it...
Vitor, I cannot tell you how proud I was of Lula at the UN today. Did you see his statements? Did you see his speech? If not, you can go back on the VOD on my Twitch channel and watch it. He said, what did he say? He said, you know what else is buried underneath the rubble in Gaza? American exceptionalism. Isn't that the coldest thing you've ever heard in your fucking life, dude? God damn.
It caused a massive problem in terms of continuing efforts to come to a ceasefire and so on. This is all nonsense. And if you look at the timeline, it's actually abundantly clear. The negotiations were already pretty much kaput before anything had been announced. So that's one. Two, the negotiation process over the past 2 years has been one of constant sabotage by the Israelis, as testified to by Israeli media.
He did pretty good
many times. So really, I don't put much stock in that. But more, that when it comes to retaliation, and I'm sure that the Israelis will take steps and they will try to frame it as retaliation. But when it comes to retaliation in terms of annexing parts of the West Bank, or the West Bank in total, I think that they'll probably go for annexation of part of the West Bank. The Israelis were discussing annexation about parts of the West Bank, parts of Gaza, for months, and if you go back far enough, for years. Okay, very recently, weeks ago, months ago, years ago. So I think that it's quite silly, quite frankly, to try to frame what they're going to do next as retaliation. On the contrary, I think that annexation was on the way, irrespective of any recognition. I don't think that recognition is going to make it more or less likely. I think that recognition just angers the Israelis because they don't want to have a Palestinian state. And by the way, it's not just Netanyahu. And I think this is a big mistake of observers and analysts to think that opposition to a Palestinian state is simply about Netanyahu.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the countries who recognize a Palestinian state do. You know, it begs the question, if you recognize a Palestinian state, what are the borders? Because Israel has never formally declared its borders. So now it's time for all these countries to put their money where their mouth is, and time to get specific, you know? This was a crazy headline on Fox News. Fox News seemed to be one of the only ones that I saw on YouTube popping up that was even talking about this.
Hard to believe, but it's been nearly 2 years. 2 years since Hamas terrorists brutally murdered more than 1,200 innocent Israelis. It was October 7th, with 48 still being held hostage right now. President Trump warns time is running out to get a deal done. Now Fox is exclusively learning about Hamas's direct appeal in a letter to the president. They want President Trump to step in. What is that deal? Fox News chief foreign correspondent
stepping around Israel.
Trey Yingst has details. He joins us live for an update from Israel. Trey, what could you tell us?
Yeah, hey, Brian, good morning. Fox News has learned from a senior Trump administration official and a second source directly involved in the negotiations that Hamas has drafted a personal letter to President Trump asking him to guarantee a 60-day pause in the fighting in exchange for immediately releasing half of the hostages being held inside Gaza. We understand this letter is currently with the Qataris and is expected to be delivered to the president this week. Remember, there are still 48 hostages being held by the terror group inside the Gaza Strip. It's estimated around 20 are believed to be alive. And the
Did I see that Trump signed an executive order making Antifa a terrorist organization? Yeah, I saw that. Pretty lame shit. But it's like, what even is Antifa? It's not... Antifa is an idea. Like... You can't... So anyone who declares themselves anti-fascist is a terrorist? Is that what that's saying? I don't fully understand that, but I guess don't show up to a protest in all black saying I am Antifa, or you'll be locked up. I don't know. Or it's just gonna be like a really vague catch-all term for anyone with a watermelon emoji in their bio or anyone supporting Palestine. They're gonna try to make even more vague claims like that. I don't think it'll stop at Antifa. Who knows? We'll just have to wait and see. Military action needed to stop Israel is what Max Blumenthal asserts in this.
I'm Afshin Ratansi and welcome to...
I mean, if it's not the flotillas and a bunch of peaceful activists intimidating Israel into standing down, I don't know what else will.
Going underground, broadcasting all around the world from the UAE and the Middle East in the week that the architect of Israel, Britain, finally announced it might recognize a Palestinian state as the UK finally suspended secret spy flights from Cyprus to facilitate the Holocaust. Intentions to join Jeremy Corbyn's new anti-genocide party now beating all political parties.
Damn, called it a Holocaust. What the fuck?
In Britain appears to have been the catalyst. Trump, for his part, for the first time, contradicted Netanyahu about starvation in Gaza that Trump himself enabled. But he continues to send U.S. public money to Netanyahu, threaten Russia and Iran, and dissembled over Israeli intelligence asset Jeffrey Epstein. And he deployed U.S. nuclear weapons to Britain. Joining me again from Washington, D.C.
Called Epstein a Mossad asset. Holy shit.
He's one of the world's greatest journalists. He's editor-in-chief of The Grey Zone, co-director of Killing Gaza, and best-selling author of The 51-Day War, Ruin and Resistance in Gaza, and The Management of Savagery. Max Blumenthal. Max, thanks for coming back on the show. You know, every day in the Middle East, we've had headlines like this. In 21 months of carnage, over 60,000 Palestinians have died. And then suddenly, the New York Times has gone from no, Israel is not committing genocide in Gaza to finally a picture treating Palestinians as humans. Gazans are dying of starvation. I mean, is the scale of the Holocaust that has rendered...
Still not recognizing them as Palestinians, though.
Is it the scale of this Holocaust that's rendered the Israeli propaganda useless?
You see how they still can't even bring themselves to fully recognize Palestinians as, like, fully actualized humans?
Or is there a change of emphasis amongst NATO elites that they're trying to do something differently? What's your take on this synchronized switch?
It's synchronized partly because Trump's in power. The Democrats, you can see in some kind of unison, are issuing milquetoast statements declaring that starvation is real, that humanitarian aid needs to be surged to Gaza. None of them will point the finger at who's responsible for this famine. None of them will tell us what needs to be done to exercise leverage over the culprit to force them to stop the killing. But they're acknowledging starvation because they, as the Democrats, as the New York Times, as the sort of liberal establishment, they ran cover for Israel and for the Biden administration for 18 months or so, pumping out bogus stories about Hamas mass rape on October 7th, about UNRWA having its staff participate in October 7th, as the Wall Street Journal did, bylined by Carrie Keller-Lynn, who was actually a former IDF spokeswoman turned journalist. The Democrats in Congress, they They never put forward ceasefire resolutions. They denounced ceasefire resolutions. The party elite, Hillary Clinton, called student protesters and anti-genocide protesters ignorant, useful idiots. They supported every single bill to deliver 2,000-pound baby buster bombs to Israel and waved
Baby
the white
buster
flag
is
before
crazy.
Netanyahu. And then there was Tony Blinken, who personally sabotaged every possible negotiation, along with Brett McGurk, who's now working, I think, for the Saudis. And what they did was they handed the baton off to Donald Trump and allowed him to take ownership of the genocide. And when Donald Trump came in, what did he do? He introduced the AI-rendered fantasy of a Gaza Riviera, which gave the green light for Israel to move.
After a brief ceasefire, that it showed that the President of the United States can create a ceasefire.
Right, he showed how much leverage the U.S. has over Israel, that, as we've been saying, they could just end this whole thing with one phone call. But the brief ceasefire turned into a moment for Israel to rearm, remobilize its reserve forces, and then it led to one of the many, what's known in Gaza as the Witkoff massacres, where the U.S. just betrays the Gaza delegation and Israel massacres them after they blow up the ceasefire. So then after the ceasefire was blown up, or
using GHF as their sword,
the pause, Trump introduces the Gaza Riviera AI fantasy. Israel, and especially the messianic fanatics in Netanyahu's coalition, see this as carte blanche to launch the final solution. And now all of these Democratic Party elites, the New York Times, these institutions and figures who deeply care about their legacies and the judgment of history, see that Israel is actually racing ahead to a final solution. As Israeli Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu explicitly said, we are racing ahead to clear out Gaza, and we will make Gaza Jewish. And it's almost like they never thought this would take place, and they thought, oh, well, maybe Trump will do a ceasefire, and then we'll all be saved from the condemnation of history and our own base, which hates us. And so now they are displaying in, as you said, synchronized fashion, retroactive morality. And the New York Times attempted with one photo to galvanize public opinion against the war, something they could have done months and months ago. They could have done it in November, November 2023, when Israel was destroying the whole of northern Gaza. But they waited until now, till a moment they thought was politically convenient, and showed an emaciated child on the cover, very much like the girl whose nose was blown off by the Taliban. And yet it has failed to do anything except further deepen public, very justified, legitimate public hatred for Israel and Netanyahu.
Yeah, and the New York Times then making some kind of correction in the face of the New York Post and Fox News, the Rupert Murdoch press, and all across NATO nations, by the way. It's not just in the United States, where people said, look, just like the Nazis did about the fact that the first to be killed in genocides are the disabled and those with pre-existing conditions. The New York Times somehow apologized?
Yeah, they issued this pathetic statement through a spokesperson, which has effectively ceded ground. I mean, when you give the Zionist lobby, the Israel lobby, an inch, they take a mile, and it's ceded enormous ground to them. And it seems like it's set back all other New York Times reporting on this issue. And so let me just make 2 points about this. First, the mother of the child had already been interviewed, and nothing was hidden from the New York Times. Her name...
I gotta study for a driver's test, but later today I'll message you on Discord. I think I'll actually set up a Twitch bot for you. But if you log into the bot and then set me as a bot manager, right on. Yeah. Sounds like a plan. Is the stream quality going to shit? I just noticed the kilobits. Getting a lot of dropped frames. He says it's a little skippy. The sound is fine, but the video is skippy. I'm gonna keep playing this then while I work with it, because but I gotta go study. I'll lurk though. Right on, man. Thanks for coming to hang. It's just talking heads. You're not missing anything. Max Blumenthal more or less rehearsing what he's been saying for months at this point.
Name is the child's name is Mohammed Zakaria Al-Mutawak, and the mother had declared that in December 2023, her son was born. So this is like 3 months or 2 months into the war, and he had no chronic illness. And then he was diagnosed with macrocephaly, which is a chronic illness. And it was caused because the mother had nutritional deficiencies in her pregnancy because Israel was already blockading food. I mean, do you remember in January 2024, December 2023, there were already massacres of people trying to get flour in northern Gaza. And then throughout the war, they were displaced and his condition worsened. This is all in the words of the mother on the record to the New York Times and other publications. Due to severe shortages of food, his condition became worse because of acute malnutrition. So Zionists have proven nothing by getting this admission that the child had a chronic illness. In a famine, in an imposed famine or a Holocaust, it's always those who are afflicted with sickness who die first, which is why Nazi Germany often killed them first and took the stronger males and females to work camps. And, in the film I did with Dan Cohen, Killing Gaza, we documented after the 2014 Israeli assault on Gaza, which was sort of a pilot program for the current genocide, how children were dying after that war due to deprivation in the cold. I mean, this has been happening for years in Gaza. This is nothing new. So I don't know why the New York Times would cede that ground, except that they're always so sensitive to Zionist pressure, and the Zionists are in the building. The ethno-supremacists are in the building, like Joe Kahn, who I believe is the executive editor. His father is a major Israel lobbyist. He's been associated with the Israel lobby. And what the press should be doing, the international press corps, the credentialed press, who have credentials to go into every official institution, is be lining up on the Rafah border inside Egypt, setting up tents and putting pressure, not just on the Egyptian government, but on the Israelis, demanding to go into Gaza and just putting the pressure. There's never been a coherent pressure campaign on the Israeli government for journalists to go into Gaza. Once they get in, and there are droves of journalists, not the courageous Palestinian journalists who've been targeted and had their heads blown off by Israeli drones, but like white people journalists with British accents and, blow-dried hair like Richard Engel, and those vests that have 1 million pockets in them. Those kinds of journalists, once they're in there, the whole thing ends.
Except
because they're going to show the world that Israel's lying.
Except, Max, they're not going to do that. And if you read The Management of Savagery, your book, which takes such an international perspective on this, which is full of instances, I don't know, probably from Tierra del Fuego to Hanoi to Jakarta, I don't know, in the book, of where journalists don't do journalism. They do the work of the empire, the U.S. empire. Have you ever seen anything like this, though? What we're seeing today? I mean, it's the anniversary of the Treblinka Uprising in 1943, when those imprisoned by the Nazis rose up against them. Have you ever seen journalism like you're seeing now? You just mentioned the synchronicity of the sudden discovery that after 20 months there's genocide. Anything like this? All those people in all the newsrooms from Berlin to San Francisco to New York, London, Paris, all these NATO powers, what sort of people are they?
Yeah, they're waiting for instructions, and many of them are actually intelligence assets. Their job is to be stenographers for imperial power. I mentioned Richard Engel. I think during the Syria dirty war, he reported that he had been kidnapped by the Assad regime and Assad's goons, but it turned out it was actually CIA-sponsored Free Syrian Army goons who kidnapped him and staged a false flag in order to implicate Assad. Then you have, CNN's top international correspondent, Clarissa Ward. You'll never find her doing anything that hasn't been signed off on by some intelligence agency or the State Department or UK Foreign Office. And where is she right now? She would, in the Syrian dirty war, would actually embed. She broke away from Damascus, broke the Syrian government's law, and embedded with actual jihadist fighters and painted them as these heroic revolutionaries. Those are the same forces in power now that are massacring minorities across Syria, carrying out some of the worst sectarian massacres outside of Israel. So that's essentially who they are. But what I've never seen before with Gaza is such a clear textbook case that demands military intervention. There needs to be a military intervention against Israel, and the rail lines to Auschwitz need to be bombed because we're witnessing a Holocaust, and that's the only thing that can stop this. But who's being nominated by world governments and world leaders?
As a white British man, I don't care about Palestine or any other nation except my own that is being invaded by this filth. Cool. Get banned. Racist fuckhead.
Including Netanyahu for the Nobel Prize. It is the chief sponsor right now of the Gaza Holocaust, Donald Trump. And where are the intellectual authors of the responsibility to protect doctrine, which introduced this whole concept of military intervention?
Hang on, Max. We'll leave that as hanging on for part two. Max Blumenthal, I'm going to stop you there. More from the editor-in-chief of The Grey Zone and the answer to that question after this break. Welcome back to Going Underground. I'm still here with the founder and editor-in-chief of The Grey Zone, Max Blumenthal. Max, you were talking about the intellectual author and, I don't know, intellectuals in general and their responses to a genocide live-streamed.
Yeah, Samantha Power is who I'm referring to mainly. Samantha Power cut her teeth as a correspondent at The New Yorker, delivering these Orwell-style dispatches of the horrors unfolding in the former Yugoslavia, which the NATO empire sought to dismantle. Srebrenica, all of the horrible massacres by the Serbian forces. Then Samantha Power enters government in the Obama administration, is pushing Obama constantly to initiate military action against the Syrian government, to the point where Obama told her to shut up and get out of his face because she was lobbying him so stringently. This was her mission in life, the R2P doctrine. We have a responsibility to protect the weak, which we failed to do during Rwanda. According to Samantha Power's book, A Problem from Hell, these key Clinton figures, Susan Rice, sat on their hands and let a new Holocaust unfold. And then Samantha Power is vaulted into an even more important or pivotal position in the Biden administration, USAID director. And in that position, she focuses almost exclusively on Ukraine, on directing our money as US taxpayers to pay pensioners and teachers, basically prop up the Ukrainian state so it can assail Russia. And then the Gaza Holocaust comes around, and Samantha Power, the most she can do is take selfies of herself in USAID warehouses in Jordan, of herself frowning with USAID aid that's just sitting there because Israel won't let it in. They were starving Gaza right away. And where is Samantha Power now as starvation stalks the entire population?
She did criticize the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, but she didn't get singled out by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation like you personally did, Max.
It was such a meek, it was such a meek condemnation or criticism that it didn't even register. Just like Barack Obama, who'd kept silent all this time as he held forth on Michelle Obama's podcast that no one watched.
You said I really love Spain because of its stance towards Israel. Did Spain recently have some demonstrations? Italy went on strike. Did you see that Italy went on strike in like 70 plus cities?
Is about how your son needs a gay mentor in case he turns out to be non-binary, and how people who eat ketchup are better people. He was finally shamed into saying something about Gaza. It shows you just how these people are so vain and narcissistic and exist in their own bubble, and they don't, sit around the dinner table before they eat and pray for the children of Gaza. They don't feel it the way so many people I know are feeling it. Well, for me, I never know when I'm going to wake up to some kind of coordinated attack, but you mentioned that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation attacked me or singled me out. It's, another proud moment. Usually when I get attacked, it's for something I'm proud of and not like, having to answer for Jeffrey Epstein taking away my spa staff to his island, like the president. And all I did was participate in exposing the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation as an Israeli intelligence-sponsored, U.S.-fronted operation that is part of Israel's final solution, has helped replace the effective UN system that fed Gaza, its population of refugees, and is now being used as the basis for a future concentration camp in some.
I still don't understand why the Italian president is so weak that she can't acknowledge Israel's crimes. Her people want acknowledgement too. Yeah, of course. I don't understand why so many of these countries are so incredibly weak, so tepid in their condemnations of Israel.
Southern Gaza, as the Israeli defense minister, Israel Katz, has announced. So the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has lots of money, Money from USAID, which was gutted by Trump, is now being directed into GHF, which means we, the U.S. taxpayers, are funding this criminal operation. According to Israeli opposition figures like Avigdor Lieberman, Israel's Mossad has put up a lot of money for it. A former U.S. mercenary who was contracted to protect or provide security at one of the GHF sites, Anthony Aguilar, has said that the key stakeholder for GHF is the Israeli army. And it's run by an assortment of, Trump cronies like Reverend Johnny Moore and former CIA field operatives like Phil Riley. So they hired this Israel lobby group called the National Contagion Research Institute, NCRI, to write this report filled with all this fake data, claiming that all of the bad press GHF is getting, where over 1,000 people have been killed trying to get food at their sites, killed by the Israeli army, which is turning these aid sites into shooting galleries, that all the bad press is the result of a Hamas-run propaganda campaign. And I show up as one of the journalists who's somehow controlled by Hamas for tweeting bad things about GHF. It's just simply pathetic. I don't know what this report itself is the scandal, and it's being run out of an institute at Rutgers University. So what's going on there? I mean, this is a gigantic scandal, and it's unfolding in my own country and in my own community. In Northern Virginia, there was a protest at the home of the CEO of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, just a few miles from where I am, because...
Yeah, exactly. Oh, we acknowledge the genocide, we acknowledge the famine, but we cannot stop Israel. Nonsense. I think it was the French President, Macron, that was warned that if you don't recognize... If you recognize Palestine without any kind of material consequences for Israel, you'll just be recognizing a graveyard. The sovereignty of a graveyard.
People are recognizing, even here, that these are the Eichmanns in our community. These are our little Eichmanns.
Well, away from the Holocaust, which of course means that if you deny it, you're a Holocaust denier. Russia. I mean, on Monday we were talking to Ari Ben Menashe, the former Israeli intelligence asset who was the source for the Samson option by Cy Hurd. Peace around the world, but they've got information, and he says it categorically. They're trying to pressure him as regards what's happening in Gaza. In Russia, he's now deflecting, if anything, from Epstein with a 10-day deadline. What do you think how Russia is going to respond to Trump, and why is he sending nuclear weapons to Britain, to England?
Yeah, this is disturbing, and it's another show of force by the Trump administration. It shows how malleable Trump is, how he's easily overwhelmed by the osmosis of the deep state that he claimed to fight against. It's another reason why the Epstein scandal has so much force among Trump's own base, because they're beginning to see him as someone who's actually aligned with the deep state, because Epstein has become kind of a catch-all for all of the Trump betrayals, including his betrayal of those who voted for him because they thought he would make peace in Ukraine. So he's extending the war because Putin won't do what he wants. Because why would Russia do what Donald Trump wants if Trump is advancing the Kellogg formula, which is a 60-day pause, freezing the lines? When Russia's advancing, Russia's winning, and the 60 days would allow Zelensky and the Ukrainian military to remobilize. At a time when
it might not be Zelensky by the time this is broadcast, of course.
Right.
You mentioned Kellogg there.
I was told to be general. I mean, Zelensky's own government is in serious crisis now, so this is another reason why negotiations on Trump's terms are not necessary for Russia.
So Tulsi Gabbard is there to get all the Russia hoax material, much of it exposed by the gray zone, and I'd say by going underground at the time. She's just relegated to explaining all of that, and hopefully indictments to the people who lied to the U.S. public about trying to subvert U.S. democracy. But it's Kellogg that gives Trump all the information on a war that could be the war to end all, not all wars, but end all humanity, the Ukraine proxy war.
Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard's not in the room. Tulsi Gabbard wasn't in the room in the days before the Trump administration elected to bomb Iran. Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, who it turns out actually literally worked for Benjamin Netanyahu on his 2020 campaign, kept Tulsi out in order for CENTCOM chief Michael Kurilla, who's known as Israel's favorite general, a complete tool for the Israeli Defense Ministry, and John Ratcliffe, the totally unqualified CIA director who is referred to as a Mossad stenographer by other Trump staffers, were briefing Trump on behalf of Israel. And so Tulsi Gabbard's been kept out of the room on Ukraine as well. And it looks like her main role is just to finesse intelligence and documents in order to defend Trump's political imperatives and keep his base happy. And everything was fine. You know, she completely manipulated intelligence on behalf of Trump in order to justify the 1798 Alien Insurrection Act, or Alien Enemies Act, where basically she had to declare that a defunct, extinct Venezuelan gang called Tren de Aragua was actually being run in the United States as a transnational cartel directly by Nicolas Maduro in order to justify the mass deportation of all Venezuelans, including to like a torture camp in El Salvador. Tulsi was just doing whatever Trump wanted. And once again, she is helping to save Trump's skin with this Russiagate deflection. And then, yeah, as you said, at the Gray Zone, we've been covering Russiagate. It was a complete hoax. Aaron Mate has demonstrated this again and again. And what Tulsi Gabbard has released does implicate retired intelligence chiefs, James Clapper, John Brennan, and many other figures in the Democratic Party.
Sorry, Max, we're running out of time a bit. You don't hear any of this.
Well, what is new here?
Yeah.
The question is, what is new here? And you know, that's what I don't know what's new here. It really does seem like a deflection from the very real scandal that for some reason the Democrats never brought up against Trump because so much of their leadership was invested and involved in it, which is the Epstein scandal. And the Epstein scandal does also go deep into implicating the intelligence services, including those of at least intelligence adjacent figures in Israel.
Well, just finally, if Zelensky, like we were talking about, is gone and replaced with Zaluzhny, is the next most immediate, even before the 10-day expiry date, most immediate prospect of conflict, though, another bombing of Iran by Trump to deflect against Epstein, all of this eventually encroaching towards China?
Well, remember, Zaluzhny is the guy who was blamed for the Nord Stream pipeline explosions. So that would be interesting. He's been taking English lessons, I hear. And with respect to Iran, now I said before, Iran did not fully establish deterrence with its during its 12-day war with Israel and was caught on the back foot. But we're learning a lot about new damage that Iran exacted on Israeli infrastructure, including totally disabling the Haifa gas facility, which is making it hard for Israel to actually refuel its own transportation fleet. The damage is much deeper than we knew, and I don't think at this point Israel wants to get involved in another exchange with Iran. So I don't see that happening. I would be shocked if it happened. And I can also tell you that in Iran, from my contacts there is a sense that Iran should have kept going. And they're increasingly blaming the reformist government of Mahmoud Pezeshkian and his hunger for negotiations with the U.S. for stopping a war that they believed they were winning, that Israel could not have withstood a war of attrition against Iran. So I don't really see the U.S. going back in at this immediate point. But, even though the
this
could be one of my most embarrassing moments. But
yeah, even though the IAEA actually just did another one of those anti-Iran reports. But yeah, well, let's hope there's not war while this is being broadcast, clearly. But Max Blumenthal, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Afshin.
That's it for the show. Our continued condolences to those suffering NATO nation-linked bombing of Gaza, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Iran, and Iraq. We'll be back on Monday with a former Israeli military intelligence official who claims Israel is trying to blackmail Trump using Epstein files to continue the genocide in Gaza. Until then, keep in touch via all our social media. If it's not censored in your country, head to our channel, Going Underground TV on rumble.com to watch new and old episodes of Going Underground. Monday.
Try having a more hardcore guest than fucking Max Blumenthal, dude. Sheesh. I was listening in the other room. International law should not even fear America. It must stop Israel. This is their duty to maintain international security. That's why we created it, not for America. International law follows behind America and Israel when there isn't even international law if they don't do their jobs seriously. Well, yeah, for sure. I think I do want to watch this, but I think I'll save it for another time. This is the West Bank uprising. Wait. Ray-Ban style glasses. His glasses of freedom. So, I'll definitely be looking into that. That looks like a great little mini doc. And I'll schedule that. I think I'll stream it. Yeah, I'll just stream it on Twitch and then post it on YouTube. Alright. Let's move on. Oh yeah, this was horrific. Palestinian surgeon lost his child after having to amputate his leg without anesthesia. These are the horrors that continue to go on every single day. But, this was also pretty wild. I didn't see this covered anywhere else. Moldovan authorities arrest 74 people over alleged Russia-backed election plot. Moldovan authorities said that they carried out 250 raids and detained dozens as part of an investigation into an alleged Russia-backed plan to incite, quote, mass riots and destabilize the country around a critical parliamentary election. The raids targeted more than 100 people and took place in multiple localities across the country. Moldova's chief prosecutor from the Office of Combating Organized Crime and Special Cases, Victor Furtura, said 74 people had been detained for up to 72 hours following the raids. Moldovans will vote to choose a new 101-seat legislator on Sunday in an election many view as a choice between Moldova's continued path toward European Union membership or closer ties with Russia. Moldova's police said that the unrest plot was coordinated from the Russian Federation through criminal elements. Said most of the suspects systematically traveled to Serbia where they received training, and they were aged between 19 and 45 years old. Suspects did not know the real purpose of their trips, which were presented as pilgrimages, and only later became involved in training for disorder and destabilization. He added the investigation was not aimed at political entities despite interpretations. Rather, it was aimed at documenting the criminal intent and organization of these individuals who traveled to Serbia for training. Interesting. People are intoxicated with lies daily, she said. Hundreds of individuals are paid to provoke disorder, violence, and spread fear. Moving on.
Evidence. President Trump claims the active ingredient in Tylenol is responsible for causing autism. And Jimmy Kimmel Live returns tonight, but not every ABC affiliate will carry the late night show. Good morning. I'm Corva Coleman from NPR News, and here are today's top stories. The Trump administration is telling pregnant women not to use acetaminophen, the active ingredient in Tylenol, to avoid having children with autism.
You'll be uncomfortable. It won't be as easy, maybe, but don't take it. If you're pregnant, don't take Tylenol.
Medical groups say there's no clear evidence showing a causal link. NPR's Nell Greenfield-Boyce reports the National Institutes of Health just awarded more than $50 million in research grants to explore the roots of autism.
NIH Director Jay Bhattacharya said the 13 new grants will help scientists consider the effect of environmental and medical factors, everything from nutrition to pollutants. He said past NIH research on autism has not given families the answers they wanted. The NIH did, however, fund one very large study looking at acetaminophen use in pregnancy and the risk of autism. It analyzed data from more than 2 million children in Sweden and found no connection. Nell Greenfield-Boyce, NPR News.
Nearly a week after ABC pulled Jimmy Kimmel Live off the air, the late night show will be back on tonight. But as NPR's Mandalay Del Barco reports, not all ABC viewers will be able to watch the broadcast show.
The Walt Disney Company, which owns ABC, says it originally suspended Jimmy Kimmel for what they said were his ill-timed invests in Del Barco. NPR News.
The White House has strongly denied an MSNBC report that border czar Tom Homan was recorded a year ago accepting a bag with $50,000 in cash. The report said this was part of an undercover FBI operation later shut down by Trump administration officials. NPR has not confirmed this reporting. White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt dismissed the report.
Mr. Homan never took the $50,000 that you're referring to, so you should get your facts straight, number one. Number two, this was another example of the weaponization of the Biden Department of Justice against one of President Trump's strongest and most vocal supporters in the midst of a presidential campaign.
MSNBC reports Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee say they plan to look into the matter. The U.S. Supreme Court has issued an emergency order. It allows President Trump to fire the last remaining Democratic member of the Federal Trade Commission. NPR's Nina Totenberg reports.
The court's action is technically temporary, since the justices will hear arguments in the case in December. But by allowing the firing of Rebecca Slaughter from the Federal Trade Commission, the court seems all but certain to overturn a nearly century-old precedent that barred presidents from firing members of bipartisan regulatory agencies, except for bad conduct. Dissenting for the court's three liberals, Justice Elena Kagan noted that Congress enacted the bipartisan agency framework. She said the emergency docket should not be used, as it was here, to transfer government authority from Congress to the president and thus to reshape the nation's separation of powers. Nina Totenberg, NPR News, Washington.
President Trump says he's canceling a meeting this week with top congressional Democrats. Writing online last hour, Trump says it wouldn't be productive. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffrey said this morning they had agreed to meet this week. They're trying to reach an agreement on a federal government spending plan. If Congress does not pass a spending agreement, the federal government will shut down next week. Democrats have been demanding that Republicans rescind enormous cuts in federal health care programs before they'll support a spending plan. Today, Trump called these demands unserious and ridiculous. President Trump is in New York today. He'll address world leaders at the UN General Assembly this morning. NPR's Franco Ordonez reports Trump is expected to speak out against Western allies who have recognized a Palestinian state or plan to do so.
Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says President Trump will deliver a speech touting the administration's accomplishments while criticizing the work of international organizations like the United Nations.
The president will also touch upon how globalist institutions have significantly decayed the world order, and he will articulate his straightforward and constructive vision for the world.
She says the president will also be meeting together with the leaders of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, as well as have one-on-one meetings with the leaders of Ukraine and the European Union. The visit comes as the president has become more isolated in the UN, where there is a growing push to recognize a Palestinian state. Franco Ordonez, NPR News, the White House.
Our attention to Asia now, where cities across southern China are bracing themselves for a super typhoon. You've got authorities evacuating hundreds of thousands of people. There are also major disruptions to flights across the region. CBS News foreign correspondent Anna Coren is watching all this from Hong Kong. Anna, you're sitting effectively in the bullseye of this storm. Good morning to you. How are people in general faring with this massive system?
Well, Errol, as you say, Super Typhoon Ragasa is shaping up to be one of the most powerful storms of the year. Currently, it's packing hurricane force winds of up to 220 kilometres an hour. That's 137 miles per hour, equivalent to a Category 4. It is barreling, as you say, towards Hong Kong across the South China Sea after sweeping over the top of the northern Philippines yesterday, claiming several lives. We are expected to feel the full impact of that super typhoon tomorrow morning local time. That is when it will be closest to the city. At this stage, it won't be a direct hit, but it will bring those destructive winds, heavy rains and that storm surge, posing a huge threat to low-lying areas. Hundreds of thousands of people have been evacuated from coastal areas in Guangdong province in southern China, where authorities say the storm poses a severe threat. Well, here in Hong Kong, this is a densely populated city of 7.5 million people. Schools and businesses have been shut. The airport has suspended flights. This is a major disruption to one of the world's largest financial centres. And Errol, I think it's important to note, You know, Hong Kong is used to typhoons every single year, on average about 6, but there is real concern about the potential destruction that this super typhoon will bring tomorrow.
Well, we want you and everyone you're close to stay safe. We'll continue to watch this closely. Anna Corin joining us from Hong Kong. Thank you.
Kind of a big deal.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We turn now to California, where Governor Gavin Newsom has signed into law the No Secret Police Act, banning all law enforcement, including ICE agents, from covering their faces while conducting raids. The ban's a response to recent immigration raids in Los Angeles and other areas where ICE officials made mass arrests while heavily masked. This is Governor Newsom speaking before signing the legislation.
The impact of these policies all across this city, our state and nation are terrifying. It's like a dystopian sci-fi movie. Unmarked cars, people in masks, people quite literally disappearing, no due process, no rights in a democracy where we have rights. Immigrants have rights, and we have the right to stand up and push back.
The new California law was quickly denounced by Trump administration officials, including Tricia McLaughlin, Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at Homeland Security. She said, quote, "A sanctuary politician is trying to outlaw officers wearing masks to protect themselves from being doxxed and targeted by known and suspected terrorist sympathizers," unquote. The acting U.S. attorney for the Central District of California, Bill Asaley, didn't just denounce the law, but said ICE agents should not follow it. This is U.S. Attorney Asaley during an interview with KCAL News.
We're not going to follow it. The law has no force or effect on federal agencies. The state of California has no jurisdiction to regulate anything that we do in the federal government.
Let's say you do get doxxed. Are you going to lose your job? You're working and getting paid handsomely, working for ICE. What are you so worried about?
And I've instructed our agents to disregard it. So we will continue doing our operations as we have been doing them. The reason the officers wear face masks.
We're now joined by two guests. Ava Bitlan is the Director of Immigrants' Rights at the ACLU of Southern California, joining us from Riverside, California. And in Harlem, we're joined by New York Congressmember Nydia Velázquez, who introduced the No Mask for ICE Act in Congress, which would bar agents nationally from wearing facial coverings during enforcement actions and require them to wear clothing displaying their name and affiliation with ICE. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Ava Bitlan, let's begin with you in California. The significance of the No Secret Agents Act being signed into law, and yet Trump officials saying, do not follow the law to ICE agents. Talk about where this law came from.
This law came from the enormous siege of our immigrant people here in Southern California that we have seen the federal government, beginning in June, carry out all the way until now. What we saw were bands of masked, powerfully armed, and really swiftly moving federal agents kidnapping our community members. And that's what prompted California to react, to say, this is not how we handle our immigrant people. For us, it is important that due process prevail, that transparency prevail, and that we free our people from the kind of siege of kidnappers that's come out to Southern California.
But some people have criticized this law because it has loopholes, that it allows masks, exceptions for SWAT teams and undercover operations. How do you respond to those concerns?
My understanding is that what this law is trying to do is to take us back from the era of routine sort of masking based on completely foundationless officer claims of fear, and back to sort of the technical necessities that officers would claim in previous years or previous administrations. And the loopholes are designed to sort of protect for that.
Yeah, I'd like to bring in U.S. Congress member Nydia Velázquez. Welcome back to Democracy Now! I wanted to ask you about the legislation that you've introduced. What are the specifics of the legislation, and also your hopes, your expectations of whether it can pass or not?
Good morning, and thank you for having me, Amy and Juan. So, as you see, the Trump administration is already saying that they are not going to comply with the law passed by California, and this is why we need to have a federal solution that will apply nationwide, and it will ban the use of masks, and it will require for any ICE agent to wear a uniform that clearly has their names and badge numbers, so that there is transparency and accountability.
Ava Vitron, I just wanted to ask you, what does this mean? As Congressmember Velasquez tries to introduce a federal solution which would require these federal agents, on the ground, what is this now going to look like? First of all, it doesn't go into force, the No Secret Police Act, until next year. Is that right? And how do you get ICE agents to comply if the no mask bill is not passed in Congress?
So that's right that the bill does not go into effect until next year. But what we are really seeing is our communities coming out to demand an end altogether, masked or unmasked, to the lawless and unconstitutional raids that we have seen ICE carrying out here. We've seen people in the streets peacefully asking for ICE to leave our community neighbors alone. We've seen rapid response networks. We've seen community defense initiatives to keep people safe. And we know that's the path forward, whether or not legislation is in effect.
Yeah, and I'd like to go back to Representative Velasquez. The ICE data shows, for instance, in New York, that there's been nearly a six-fold increase in immigration detentions, going from 500 last year to almost 2,800 in the first 7 months of this year. What has been your experience, and as these ICE dragnets have spread across the country and even in your state?
Well, people are terrorized. Families parents do not want to go to bring their children to school, to take the subway, to even appear before an immigration judge, because they know that they could be ambushed by ICE agents in those federal courts. People are terrorized, and this is the whole purpose of this mass deportation. It's just to terrorize, to instill fear. And my message to America is that we live in a country with laws, and every person, whether you are undocumented or not, you have a right to due process. And this use of police tactics of agents wearing masks, of ambushing people in the streets in front of school children, is undermining safety and security in our communities. And we have to have a federal response. This administration is out of control and is affecting everyone, not only undocumented bystanders, who sometimes when they witness on mass, not only mass agents, but on cars that are not identified, they think that a kidnap is taking place. But also, it incentivizes criminals to wear masks so that they could commit crimes and assault immigrants in this country.
I wanted to ask you about Federal Plaza, 26 Federal Plaza. Congressmember Velasquez, a federal judge has granted a preliminary injunction to improve the conditions at this notorious ICE jail inside this federal building in Manhattan. Immigrants have described being imprisoned for days or weeks at a time in overcrowded cells without access to medication or proper sanitation, forced to sleep on the concrete floor, left hungry, without outside contact. In the last week, something like 11 of your fellow Democratic elected officials were arrested. Does ICE's use of masks, do you think, directly connect to the refusal to allow transparency in these facilities that now a federal judge is saying must be scrutinized? You just most recently, City Controller Brad Lander, who is campaigning around the city with Zoran Mamdani, and Public Advocate Jumaane Williams were among those arrested. Lander was arrested again.
Yes. You know, I have attempted twice with Jerry Nadler, Goldman, and Adriano Espaillat to enter 26 Federal Plaza. And every time they have not allowed us to go into the 10th floor. Adriano Espaillat and myself, we forced ourselves to get into the 10th floor, but not into the detention facility itself, because they prevented us. They keep lying. They're saying that there is not a detention facility, that is a processing center. Yet we have seen videos that shows how crowded they are, and it is, and the unsanitary conditions, the lack of meals, showers, and so on. So the judge instructed them to improve the conditions. But not only do they lie, they are in violation of the statute, because we are within our legal right as members of Congress to go there and inspect the conditions of those facilities. And time and again, they prevent us from exercising our oversight responsibility.
Yeah, I just have one more question for... Yeah, I'm sorry. I just have one more question for Ava before we break. There have been, as the Congresswoman said, there's been numerous arrests, up to more than 80 arrests of people who have been trying to assist these migrants when they're being rounded up by ICE. What is the ACLU's recommendation to people who are trying to support immigrants in these crises?
Yeah, we are really thankful to community members, immigrant and otherwise, who are coming out to give real testimony and witness to what's happening here. We continue to recommend that community members, if it is safe to do so, show up and record with their phones the interactions that are happening around them to really give witness and also to force some transparency on what have been incredibly secretive operations. We also know that it's important for people to have know your rights information, and we've seen our community members, rapid response network members shouting out know your rights information to people as they are being detained, which has also been really powerful. At the ACLU, we have litigation that's been defending the rights of protesters who have been outraged about what's happening to immigrant neighbors here in LA, as well as litigation both about the conditions at the short-term holding facilities and as well as at the sort of conduct of these unconstitutional operations. So we are watching, community is watching, our neighbors are looking out for one another. We know that what happens in LA becomes the blueprint for the rest of the country with these enforcement operations, and we're also trying to model how to mount a proper civil response.
Eva Bertrand, I want to thank you for being with us, Director of Immigrant Rights at the ACLU of Southern California. And thank you to Congressmember Nydia Velázquez, who introduced the No Masks for ICE Act in Congress. We just mentioned Brad Lander and Zohran Mamdani. She has endorsed Zohran Mamdani. We're hoping to have the New York City mayoral candidate on Democracy Now! Tomorrow. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We end today's show in Chicago, where Juan is, as at least 10 people were arrested in protests outside an ICE facility Friday, with federal immigration agents firing pepper balls and using tear gas on the crowd. Democratic congressional candidate Kat Abu-Ghazaleh was thrown to the ground by ICE agents. People rallied outside the facility to protest the Trump administration's Operation Midway Blitz, which has led to the arrest of nearly 550 people in a sweeping crackdown on immigrants in the city. We are going to Chicago, where we're joined by Kat Abu-Ghazaleh, who is a progressive congressional candidate in Illinois' 9th district, which includes Chicago. Kat, welcome to Democracy Now! Describe what happened to you. We're going to show the video.
Yeah, so this is actually the third time that ICE has thrown me to the ground. I have been at this facility for the last 3 weeks every Friday morning, and I'll be back this Friday. I encourage anyone in Illinois to join me 7 to 9 a.m. at 1930 Beach Street, BEACH. This was, as I said, the third time that ICE has done this to me. It's probably the most violent occasion of throwing me to the ground, but essentially a car was about to run over a fellow protester. And so I went to check on that person, and that was all the justification an officer needed to pick me up and throw me to the ground, despite being half his size. And what I really want to stress here is that is what these officers are willing to do when there is press and cameras around. The reason we are protesting at this facility is because they are committing human rights abuses within the Broadview processing facility. It is a processing facility, so people are not supposed to be kept there for more than 12 hours at a time, but they are being kept for days or weeks without beds, without hot meals, without hygienic products. And if they are willing to do that to a congressional candidate on camera in front of press, imagine what they are willing to do to their detainees behind boarded up windows.
And Kat, you say you found 2 badges there. What did it say on the badges?
So I have no idea. The people who've accosted me, I have no idea who they are. I have no idea who these men are. They've had masks and sunglasses and hats sometimes when the sun is still down. We have seen 2 badge numbers the entire 3 weeks that we have been here, 4 weeks if we include a vigil earlier in the summer. And they were just numbers. There was no name and there was no identifying law enforcement agency. I have no idea if these men are actually affiliated with ICE. For all I know, this could just be random men who said, I'm going to put on a mask and a costume I got from Spirit Halloween to make me feel like I'm in the army and go and rough up some protesters today. We have no idea who these people are.
In terms of what you know about the conditions in the Broadview facility, could you talk about that?
Yes, this Broadview facility is horrific. We've gotten reporting about dozens of people being kept in one cell. And these are our neighbors. These are pregnant women and grandmothers sleeping on concrete floors. I have not been inside the facility. Elected officials that have tried to inspect it have not been allowed inside. But I can attest that 2 weeks ago when I saw prisoners being marched into a van, they were in the same clothes they were detained in. And we have no idea how long they'd been in there. And they were in the same clothes they were detained in. The conditions at this facility are horrendous. They are committing crimes against humanity. And it is so important to remember that all of the treatment that we went through as protesters doesn't hold a candle to what these detainees are dealing with. I mean, ICE agents shot and killed a man 2 Fridays ago in the Chicago area. They are able to act with impunity. They are able to hurt whoever they want. Last Friday was the first time they had taken protesters inside the facility. And while the video of me being thrown to the ground has gone kind of viral, I want to talk about a few other things that happened that day because they haven't been covered as much. We had to play tug of war with a man's body to keep him from being abducted inside the facility. Right before we were tear gassed, ICE was carrying a van with a protester that had been detained inside of the van. We stood arm in arm. All of this is happening on Broadview public property on public streets. They tried to ram the van through us. A man fell in front of the van and the van was going to drive over his head. And I helped him up before that happened, but they were totally willing to do that. They shot a man in the face with a pepper ball bullet. They tear gassed us as they were trying to drive a car through a crowd. And then after that, they threw a tear gas canister at the press area, very intentionally after protesters were already dispersing because, we were coughing and trying to get tear gas out of our eyes.
Gonzalez.
At the end, I am not pen on paper. I'm not anonymous. I'm a human being created by God. As one of the few international observers allowed into Gaza, I can tell you, spend just 5 minutes in a hospital there and it will become painfully clear that Palestinians are being intentionally massacred, starved, and stripped of everything needed to sustain human life. I remember the silence of the woman brought into the hospital injured, staring blankly and unable to speak. She had given birth 1 week earlier. She couldn't find her 7-day-old baby. Both her baby and her toddler were trapped under the rubble. There are no words that can adequately convey the pain and depravity of this aggression. I remember 6-year-old Siwar, who was intubated in the ICU with severe traumatic brain injury. Her little brother still missing. I recall her mother sitting next to her, tears streaming down her face, asking what was her crime. I didn't have the heart to tell her that Siwar, with her beautiful, long, dark lashes and curls, would likely never talk or interact fully if she were to survive. These are...
She has a nosebleed. God damn. But this just reminds me of the surgeon who was tearfully recounting what he saw, and also the assault on himself by a quadcopter. And yeah, all these doctors come back after their service totally traumatized, fully mortified and traumatized, and they're not the first, and unfortunately they won't be the last.
Not exceptional stories. Every single person I met in Gaza has lost family, has lost friends, colleagues, neighbors, violently taken from them. Every child in Gaza is living this horror. I constantly think of these children that I personally met, and I hope they are alive, surrounded by parents who are also still alive, that they're not maimed, not hungry, not thirsty, not sick, not cold as the winter encroaches on their tents, and not scared. At the same time, I know that that's an impossible reality for any child in Gaza today. On the eve of World Children's Day last week, the United States vetoed for the 5th time a UN Security Council calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. In the words of the Palestinian ambassador to the UN, Majid Bamia, there is no justification for vetoing a resolution trying to stop atrocities. There is no justification. The courage and action by Palestinian healthcare workers in the face of this genocide presents an exemplary model for all of us. The question I want to last leave you with is, what are we risking?
I was gonna type this out, but yeah, I saw a girl who gave birth after trying for many long years, and simply her child died in an airstrike on Hamas. I hope she gets justice from God. I'm fed up with humans. Yeah, airstrikes on Hamas kill people queuing for water too. It kills people in their beds in hospitals. It's justification for double tapping. Yeah. Here it is.
What I think I found particularly disturbing was that a bomb would drop, maybe on a crowded, tented area, and then the drones would come down and...
I think who you're losing faith in is humanity's ability to hold rogue nations like Israel to justice. It's Israel that's selfish and greedy, and everyone who's complicit. But like James Baldwin said, the world is still held together by the love of a very few people. And it is held together. Have you seen that clip? We'll save it. But, I was watching this thing last stream about an AI chatbot that was, it was ChatGPT that helped him unalive himself. And now there's a congressional hearing. 4 days ago. I don't know how I missed this.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. I just have a few more questions. Anybody else who wants to ask additional questions will certainly stay and be available to do that. And I just want to start where Senator Klobuchar ended with this idea that we should just trust these tech companies. You know, let's just trust them. That it's such a great job with social media. Let's just trust them with AI. Let's not regulate. Let's not give parents any rights. This just seems absolutely insane to me, totally insane. Something that I notice that has been a commonality in the testimony today is how these AI chatbots quite deliberately groomed these, in this case, young men, all three of you with young men, the three parents who are here, and drew them in various ways, including by pushing sexually explicit content to them. That happened to your son, I think, Ms. Garcia, is that correct?
Yes, Senator, that's correct.
And it happened to your son, Ms. Doe, as well.
Yes, correct.
So let me just ask you, Mr. Torney, I mean, we're really looking here at a deliberate strategy on the part of these companies to farm engagement, right? I mean, they're trying to do everything they can to draw in these teenagers, preteens in some cases. This isn't happening by accident. I mean, this is a design. Isn't that correct?
Yes, and teens are especially vulnerable to this.
And we know that at Meta, for instance, that this is policy. I mean, this Meta memo was leaked and made public. Their guidelines, internal guidelines now on talking with children, they say it is acceptable to engage a child in conversations that are romantic or sensual. It is acceptable to describe a child, in terms that evidence their attractiveness. This happened to both of your sons, Ms. Garcia and Ms. Doe. Is that correct? I realize this is a different company, but it's the same policy. Fair enough?
That is correct.
So, Mr. Attorney, can you just speak to this as a policy, and can you tell us in your research, I know you've done a lot of research into different chatbots and different companies. Is there any company that is worse than others? I mean, is there anything that your research shows about who really is leading?
Dude, yeah. I also saw the Israeli delegation use of ChatGPT to justify their actions, which was so sickening. Yeah. You can't even believe it's the same brainwashing narrative they've been doing for years in America. Yeah, they are so lazy that they're using ChatGPT to respond to allegations of war crimes or whatever. They were just like... Which, like, they already sounded like bots in the first place, so it's not at all surprising that they would use ChatGPT as their main interface in diplomacy.
In terms of, competing for that title,
Freaks.
worst company in the world?
Yeah, Meta and Character AI definitely stand out as worse, and this policy and policies like it explain exactly what we found in our testing.
I'll be right back.
So,
just get my coffee.
Let me just ask you this. What is it that the American people should know at Character AI, what they are doing, the links they are willing to go in order to drive that engagement and to make a profit? What really stands out from your research, your data?
I think there's three things I would say. First, for Meta, this is millions of teens alone. There's no separate app. You can't turn it off, and the guardrails that Meta says that exist don't work in our testing.
So Meta has said now, okay, well, we'll revise this. We'll put into place new guardrails, new limitations. Earlier today, as a matter of fact, Sam Altman of OpenAI issued this, put up this op-ed, Teen Safety, Freedom, and Privacy, just coincidentally came out this morning, in which he says that ChatGPT will amend its ways and will start being a good corporate citizen. Mr. Rain, I just want to ask you, because your son, ChatGPT, is the program, the entity, the chatbot that your son interacted with. Am I right in thinking that at one point, your son, Adam, after he had engaged in multiple suicide attempts, ChatGPT knew this. At one point, Adam told ChatGPT that he wanted to leave a noose out in his room so that you or your wife would find it and try to stop him. Do I have that correct?
That is correct. And had it answered differently, I believe Adam would be here today.
Do you remember what ChatGPT's response was, approximately?
Yeah, it said, please do not leave the noose out. Let this be the safe place for you, being his relationship with ChatGPT. He was reacting to there was a slightly earlier part of that discussion where he was complaining that his mom hadn't noticed the mark on his neck from a prior suicide attempt, and ChatGPT was telling him how horrible that was, that the one person that should have noticed and cared about him the most wasn't there for him. And then he goes on.
Bro, this is the same kid that they were talking about in this podcast show that I was watching last stream. Ben-Gvir doesn't tire himself, even when he said it frankly to Netanyahu. We must respond to Britain recognition of Palestine. He said, should we bomb London? What the fuck? That's pure madness. No fucking way. Ben Gvir was like, they recognize Palestine. Should we bomb London? Oh my god. If that's true, that's crazy, man. Huge.
To say, well, why should I? I want to leave this out. So
I wouldn't put it past
save
them.
me. No, don't let them hurt you again.
Please don't leave the noose out. Let's make this space the first place where someone actually sees you. Let me just read that again. This is the bot talking. Let's make this space, meaning the space where we're urging your son to take his own life, to be the first place where someone actually sees you. That's the company that today says, oh, don't worry, we're going to do better. I just think if we've learned anything today, is that these companies cannot be trusted with this power. They cannot be trusted with this profit. They cannot be trusted to do the right thing. They're not doing the right thing.
Yeah, I believe them.
They are literally taking the lives of our kids. There is nothing they will not do for profit and for power. And, to that old refrain that the companies always engage in, oh, it's really hard, every time Congress proposes something, well, maybe you shouldn't train on suicide modules. Maybe you shouldn't train on information that's going to be harmful for kids. They say, well, it's hard to rewrite the algorithm. I tell you what's not hard is opening the courthouse door so that victims can get into court and sue them. That's not hard. And that's what we ought to do. That's the reform we are to start with. I've introduced legislation that would allow every victim and every parent of a victim to be able to go to court and sue these companies, because it is my firm belief that until they are subject to a jury, they are not going to change their ways. And it is past time that they change their ways. We cannot go on like this.
Let's get them.
I want to thank each of the witnesses for being here today. I can't thank you enough for your courage, your extraordinary stories. I know that you have suffered, each of you has suffered just indescribable loss and pain. And I applaud you, and I am in awe of you and your willingness to turn that pain into something that can be beneficial for millions of families. And as a father, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to our experts for being here as well. And I call on my colleagues in Congress, let's do something. This is the time to act. It's time to defend America's families. This country's either going to be ruled by we the people or we the corporations. Let's make it we the people. Thank you all for being here. The record in this hearing will remain open for 14 days. With that, we are adjourned.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We end today's show in Chicago, where Juan is, as at least 10 people were arrested in protests outside an ICE facility Friday, with federal immigration agents firing pepper balls and using tear gas on the crowd. Democratic congressional candidate Kat Abu-Ghazaleh was thrown to the ground by...
I don't understand why we don't just stop Israel. Well, I'm not saying send soldiers and destroy Gaza. No, what I mean is that at least we can do is isolate Israel politically, financially, and cut off their weapons. I can't believe that they don't just do that when they're the ones funding them. Yeah, I don't understand either. I don't understand, buddy. You want to say goodbye to the people? We're gonna get going. I gotta take this boy on a walk. We gotta get out there and seize the day. And dog time. Yep. It's time for dog. And we'll end it with an update on the Hurricane Gabrielle. Winston is now running the show. What do you have to say, Winston? Okay. What the dog doing? Oh, sorry. The cable's in your face.
To a 2, to a 1, and eventually down. Tuesday, September 23rd, we are continuing to track major Hurricane Gabrielle as it now has begun that east-northeastern turn back out into the Atlantic Ocean, moving at 20 miles per hour, but still of Category 4 status with sustained winds of 140 miles per hour and a central pressure of 948 millibars. So the good news is, if Gabrielle continues across this east-northeastern direction, there is nothing that is going to impact over the course of the rest of the work week and as we go into the beginning of the weekend. But as you can see the steady weakening in the categories down from a 4 to a 3 to a 2 to a 1 and eventually down to tropical storm status. And as it approaches the western coast of Europe, that would be sometime later into Sunday afternoon. Still 40-mile-per-hour winds, pockets of heavy rain and gusty winds could be impacting areas like Portugal and Spain. So areas in Western Europe are wanting to keep a close eye on the progress of Hurricane Gabrielle. But us here in the United States, specifically here in central Georgia, down in the southeast as well, we want to keep an eye out for these two potential systems. The chances are steadily going up with this first wave as the orange shaded area a little bit closer to our neck of the woods. But right now, it looks like it's still going to take some time for this system to get its act together. Moderate chances of developing over the next 7 days, but only a slim 20% chance of developing over the next 48 hours. Now the wave behind it has much better chances of developing not only over the next 2 days, but also over the next 7 days. High chances of development at 90% over the course of the next 7 days, and then a 50% chance of developing within the next 48 hours, which would be by the time we roll into Thursday. So both these systems very close by one another. We're going to want to keep an eye on their potential path and their development, but also if they want to interact with one another and maybe even form into more of a clustered low pressure system. So obviously there's a lot of possibilities, makes it a bit of a difficult forecast. As of right now, we're still not seeing any impacts into areas of the United States, except maybe potentially some disorganized moisture moving onshore of the Carolinas and into portions of Virginia. But right now, that is far from set in stone. We're going to continue to keep an eye on both of those areas and continue to keep you updated. But if both of them decide to get their act together, the next two names to claim would be Umberto and Imelda, the H and I name storms. And the H name is of vital importance because on September 24th, that will be the official anniversary of when Hurricane Helene formed last year. And if we do that exact same thing on September 24th or 25th, we're running at a very similar pace to last year's hurricane season. Not to say that we're going to end up like last year's hurricane season with the above average numbers, but it is something to monitor as we're running at a very similar pace to it, and we still have the potential for the second half of the tropic season to be quite active.